Welcome to Chapter 1, where we'll dismantle that comforting belief that you're too smart to be fooled. Spoiler alert. You're not, I'm not, none of us are, and the research proves it. This chapter is essentially a psychological security audit of the hardware between your ears, and I guarantee you're not going to like the vulnerabilities we uncover. Today, we're exploring the fundamental weaknesses in human cognition that make us susceptible to disinformation. These aren't just academic curiosities. They're operational security risks that impact intelligence analysis, field assessments, and strategic planning. We've identified 4 critical vulnerability clusters that adversaries routinely exploit, often without our awareness. What makes these vulnerabilities particularly dangerous is that they operate below our conscious awareness. You can't defend against what you don't recognize, and these cognitive blind spots are essentially pre-installed backdoors in our mental operating systems. In the coming slides, we'll expose these vulnerabilities and begin the uncomfortable process of patching them, assuming you can overcome your brain's natural resistance to acknowledging its own limitations. Let's start with a sobering thought. That instinct that's kept you alive in the field, it's actually making you vulnerable to BS. Communications scholar Timothy Levine calls it the truth default theory, which is a fancy way of saying humans are gullible by factory settings. His research shows we're generally better at detecting truths than lies, which explains why counterintelligence is such a nightmare. This isn't just an academic observation. Levine's experiments demonstrated that people correctly identified truths about 75% of the time, but only spotted lies 54% of the time. That's barely better than a coin flip when it comes to detecting deception. And before you smugly think, "Not me," the research specifically shows that confidence in your lie detection abilities correlates negatively with actual performance. In other words, the more certain you are that you can spot a lie, the worse you probably are at it. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. Our ancestors survived by cooperating, and default trust enabled faster collaboration. The occasional betrayal was less costly than constant suspicion. But in today's information environment, that same default setting is being weaponized against us. That trust your gut advice from the academy? Maybe reconsider when you're swimming in a sea of deliberately crafted falsehoods designed to trigger exactly those gut reactions. Then there's confirmation bias. We love information that tells us we're right. It's like that colleague who only remembers intel that supports their pet theory while conveniently forgetting everything else. Research by Pennicook and Rand shows that social media users frequently share false headlines that match their beliefs without checking sources. Sound like anyone in your briefing room. In controlled experiments, subjects given identical evidence interpreted it differently based on their prior beliefs. Even more disturbing, when researchers presented evidence contradicting someone's position, it often strengthened their original belief, what psychologists call the backfire effect. This is why correcting misinformation can sometimes entrench it further. And now for my personal favorite, the Dunning-Kruger Effect. This cognitive bias shows that the less you know about a subject, the more you think you know, explaining about 90% of interdepartmental meetings. Dunning and Kruger's research found that participants scoring in the bottom quartile on tests consistently overestimated their performance, placing themselves in the 62nd percentile on average. Meanwhile, top performers underestimated their abilities. The most dangerous person at the Intelligence Fusion Center isn't the rookie. It's the veteran who thinks they've seen it all before. The cruel irony of Dunning-Kruger is that the very knowledge needed to recognize incompetence is precisely what the incompetent lack. Spoiler alert. That includes all of us in certain domains. Ever notice how your analytical skills go out the window when you're pissed off? That's by design. Research by psychologist Joseph Forgas demonstrates that negative emotions significantly increase our susceptibility to false narratives. That's why adversaries love pushing your buttons. Angry analysts make lousy fact-checkers. Remember that Intel report that got everyone worked up last month? Exactly how much verification happened after the shouting started. Neuroscientific research, using fMRI scans, shows that emotional arousal decreases activity in brain regions responsible for critical thinking and increases activity in regions associated with impulsive responses. When we're emotional, we quite literally think with different parts of our brain. The most effective emotions for manipulation: anger and fear, closely followed by moral outrage. A 2018 study found that moral emotional language in social media content increased resharing by 20% per emotional word. That's why disinformation operations often target hot-button cultural issues, their emotional accelerants. What makes this particularly insidious is that we rarely recognize when we're being emotionally manipulated. We experience our reactions as authentic and justified, completely unaware that our nervous system has been hijacked and our critical faculties compromised. It's the perfect exploit, one that triggers automatic defensive responses while simultaneously disabling the very systems that might detect it. Then there's information overload, the digital equivalent of paperwork hell. Recent studies indicate that professionals encounter tens of thousands of words daily, with only a fraction receiving critical evaluation. That's like trying to spot one specific suspect in a crowd while simultaneously juggling flaming torches and reciting the agency's mission statement backward. The numbers are staggering. The average person processes approximately 74 gigabytes of information daily, equivalent to watching 16 movies, while making around 35,000 decisions. Our brains simply weren't designed for this level of input. To cope, we develop shortcuts, heuristics that allow quick judgments but sacrifice accuracy. What makes this particularly dangerous in intelligence contexts is that information overload can be weaponized. The fire hose of falsehood technique, pioneered by certain state actors, deliberately floods channels with contradictory information, overwhelming our processing capacity. When facing information saturation, even trained analysts resort to shortcuts. Trusted sources, which can be spoofed, consensus views, which can be manufactured, or emotional resonance, which, as we've discussed, is highly manipulable. The system isn't broken. It was designed this way. Our adversaries understand that overwhelming our cognitive filters is more effective than creating perfect deceptions. They don't need to fool all of us all the time, just enough of us enough of the time to sow confusion. And in environments where information volume already exceeds processing capacity, this approach proves frighteningly effective. So what's the takeaway for intelligence professionals? First, recognizing these vulnerabilities exists is half the battle. Your brain isn't faulty. It's just running outdated software optimized for a different information environment. The problem isn't that we have these biases. It's that we fail to account for them in our analytical processes. Second, structured analytical techniques aren't bureaucratic torture devices designed to waste your time. They're cognitive security patches. Methods like analysis of competing hypotheses, pre-mortem analysis, and devil's advocacy were specifically developed to circumvent these mental blind spots. Yes, they're sometimes cumbersome, but so are bulletproof vests, and both can save your professional life. Third, emotional awareness is an operational skill, not a touchy-feely HR requirement. When you feel strong emotional reactions to information, that should trigger a professional red flag. The most effective analysts develop the metacognitive habit of asking, why am I having such a strong reaction to this intelligence? Is this response informing my analysis or distorting it? Finally, develop systematic verification, protocols that you follow regardless of how compelling information appears. The more persuasive, alarming, or confirming a piece of intelligence seems, the more rigorously you should scrutinize it. Remember, The most dangerous deceptions aren't the ones that look suspicious. They're the ones that look exactly like what you already believe or desperately want to be true. For those of you who actually read footnotes, and based on our collective cognitive profile, that's approximately 12% of you, here are the research foundations for what we've covered. Timothy Levine's work on truth default theory, outlined in his 2019 paper in Journal of Language and Social Psychology, provides the framework for understanding our baseline vulnerability to deception. His research spans decades and has been validated across multiple cultures and contexts. The landmark 1999 study by David Dunning and Justin Kruger in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology introduced what we now call the Dunning-Kruger Effect. Their findings on the relationship between competence and self-assessment have been replicated across numerous domains, including intelligence analysis. Joseph Forgaz's 2019 research in Annual Review of Psychology synthesizes decades of work on how emotions influence information processing, judgment, and decision-making. His experiments demonstrate how emotional states systematically alter cognitive processes, often without conscious awareness. David Bodden and Lynn Robinson's 2020 comprehensive review in Journal of Information Science documents the cognitive and behavioral effects of information overload, with particular attention to professional decision-making contexts, making it especially relevant to intelligence work. These aren't just academic citations. They're psychological security bulletins identifying exploitable vulnerabilities in our cognitive infrastructure. Ignore them at your professional peril. I think I better stop here today. We will continue to see how disinformation spreads on next episode. Until next time, keep learning and stay engaged. This is Kaede out.